expeditious as possible. Mr Willock, is it the intention of the Commonwealth Grants Commission to make a submission to the Productivity Commission review process?
At this stage, I don't think that the Commission itself has had an opportunity to consider that. So the Commission, I suppose just to sort of be a bit clear about what I'm saying, we think of the Commission in two different ways. There is the Commission, namely the Chair and the two statutorily appointed members who are the Commission. We are, if you like, staff of the Commission. We're the Secretariat to the Commission. So when it comes to the question about what will the Commission do, that largely reflects a decision of those three statutory members, and those three statutory members have not yet had an occasion to turn their mind to that question.
So they haven't yet contemplated whether or not to make a submission to the Productivity Commission review on HFE?
So, Senator, I think I don't think I have it here in front of me, but as you will know, the Productivity Commission review was announced by the government shortly before the budget, and it's been even more recently that the Productivity Commission put out a short guidance note to people, or to the community generally, about that inquiry they're conducting and what sorts of issues they would like to have.
So there's a chance that the Commonwealth Grants Commission will not defend the HFE by not making a submission to the Productivity Commission review?
Well, there is a chance that the Commission will take the view that the Productivity Commission is another independent statutory body charged by government to look at HFE. I need to highlight again that the Commission itself, the Commonwealth Grants Commission, not the Productivity Commission, is itself currently engaged in a review of its methods. So we typically call these a 5-year review. In late last year, the Treasurer gave us terms of reference to undertake a comprehensive review of all of our methods, which go to how we seek to implement HFE, and to report to the Treasurer on the 28th of February 2020. So the Commonwealth Grants Commission and the commissioners that we work for have their own mandate from the Treasurer to undertake a comprehensive review of our methodology in full consultation with each of the states and territories. And that's the main task that the Commission is focused on.
Do you see the final report of the Productivity Commission review, which will be available on the 30th of January next year, informing the review that the Commonwealth Grants Commission has been asked to undertake and which will report in 2020?
Yes, I think the Commission itself, as part of this 2020 review that the Commonwealth Grants Commission is conducting, we as staff of the Commission issued a discussion paper on, I think, the 12th of May, around about then. And in doing that, that discussion paper and indeed our website makes it clear that the Commission is aware of the fact that the Productivity Commission is conducting a review of the economic effects of HFE, and so I suppose wanted to provide some sort of public signal that the Commonwealth Grants Commission is undertaking its review with full awareness of the fact that the Productivity Commission is doing a review of HFE. They are concurrent processes. They have slightly different focuses, although there may be some overlap in particular areas. So the Commonwealth Grants Commission said that it believes that that the CGC review will complement and assist the PC's work, and in looking at our work program for our review, our Commission has specifically factored in an opportunity for the states and the territories to come back to the Commission to reflect on any outcomes of the PC process post the January 2018 reporting date for the PC.
In your early evidence, you correctly noted that demographics and area and remoteness all affect the calculation. Does economic circumstance come into the Commission's consideration, and how?
So what the Commission seeks to equalise in implementing horizontal fiscal equalisation is the fiscal capacity of states to provide services. The Commission is equalising the capacity of states to provide services without saying how states should provide services or where they should direct the money. I mean, as no doubt you know, Senator, the GST is so-called untied revenue. The states can do with that revenue
What they will.
What they will. So that's sort of fairly clear. I've lost my train of thought.
We were talking about economic circumstance.
So the economic circumstances can feed into the Commission's, it can affect state data. So general economic circumstances will affect, for example, property markets, which will then affect the capacity of a particular state to raise money through land transfer taxes and things like that. But the Commission, HFE is not about equalising state economies or state budget positions or anything else out there that relates, if you like, to the wider economy. It's to do with equalising the fiscal capacities of states to provide services.
So it sounds to me like the issue around the particular economic circumstances gets realised by how the economic circumstances influences the data that comes to the Commonwealth Grants Commission.
Indeed. And Treasurer, Senator, perhaps I'm being prophetic.
That would be.
I don't think there'll be many people endorsing your consideration, Mr. Wilcox. Never mind. After this process, it might be different, but never mind.
Yeah, sorry, I'll
It might make me the Premier of Western Australia.
I was just going to make the point also, which I'm sure you would be aware of, that when the Commission is making its assessments, its revenue assessments and expense assessments, it is of course relying on lagged data. So we do those assessments off the basis of a so-called assessment period of 3 years. So a complaint that some would make of the Commission's methodology is that we are not equalising in the so-called application year, i.e. the year in which the relevant GST is actually being provided to a state. We're actually equalising the fiscal capacities of states over a 3-year period in the past. So, again, in the very small world of people who are interested in horizontal fiscal equalisation in Australia,
that world has got much bigger. That world has got much bigger now.
Yeah, okay, but it's still a pretty small world.
The informed world.
This issue is called the contemporaneity issue. So, what, if anything, should or could the Commission do to ensure that its assessment of relative state fiscal capacity is as up-to-date as possible to ensure that the amount of GST that is then provided to a state better reflects the actual fiscal capacity that they have at the time that they receive that GST. And so the discussion paper that I referred to squarely put that issue out there and indeed I think provided some alternative ways. Now, none of this is clear-cut. It's not as if like there's an obvious way.
Do you agree it is a black box? Or part?
I don't agree that it's a black box. Well, let me put it this way. I'm not sure what people would mean when they say it's a black box. I certainly want, though, to put the point that the Commission recognises that there are different arguments, there are trade-offs in a whole lot of, if you like, method choices that the Commission has to make decisions on, and that perhaps, if you like, stakeholders would wish the Commission to make some different judgments or to come to a different set of trade-offs. So in this case of so-called contemporaneity, the Commission has used this approach, the 3 years of data rather than just 1 year's data, to sort of smooth any sort of lumps and bumps and volatility and outlier bits of data. and it's uses 3-year data because that's more authoritative. It's sort of ABS verified GFS data rather than, say, forecasts from individual states, which may or may not turn to be, out to be less than robust. And it also reflects, if you like, previous reviews, which have been fully consultative and fully had buy-in from a number of states. Well, from all states.
Mr Wilcock, on notice, can you provide me with a list of those payments that have been quarantined from the GST distribution arrangements for the last 4 years, and what the value of those payments that have been quarantined has been? In addition to that, technically, is it available to the Commonwealth Treasurer to change the relativity recommendation that is made by the Commonwealth Grants Commission to the Federal Treasurer?
So we can certainly provide you with the list of quarantine payments, because payments are quarantined as a result of directions to us in terms of reference from the Treasurer, so we simply need to look at our terms of reference, we can get that. The role of the Commission is to make a recommendation to the Treasurer on how to share out the GST pool in a way that achieves horizontal fiscal equalisation. The Commission's job finishes with the making of that recommendation. What then happens to the Commission's recommendation is frankly up to the Treasurer, and what, if any, constraints there would be for the Treasurer in the circumstances that you postulate.
Yes, but there's no legislative restraint.
Not that I'm aware of.
And then finally, in your earlier evidence, you talked about stresses in the system. Stresses was a word that you used. At a high level, what are those stresses?
Oh, I think I used that word in connection with the
in
fact
response
that,
to Senator Polly's question, yeah.
In response to Senator Polly's question, where I was sort of making the point that it is, I think, generally recognised that WA does not like the GST share that the Commission has most recently been recommending.
I thought there might have been some economic stresses in the system rather than, but I understand that point. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Smith.